Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. Tonight, I'm really excited to be joined by a guest who many of you probably know if you are doing any kind of reading in education and what works for students in terms of their learning and growth. And that guest tonight is Dr. Doug Fisher. Dr. Fisher is a professor at San Diego State University. In fact, he is the chair of the Educational Leadership Department. He is also a teacher, leader, and founder of Health Science High School and Middle School, also in San Diego. As my listeners probably know, Doug has written extensively on literacy, on school culture and climate. He has also written on curriculum, both as an individual and with colleagues. One of his most notable colleagues, of course, is Dr. Nancy Fry. Doug is just a wealth of knowledge. Doug and I were talking about what we were going to talk about tonight, because off camera, because we could talk about so much given Doug's expertise. We thought, given how much Doug has given to the education community, how he writes, how he presents at conferences, how he collaborates with other educators, both long-serving educators and newer educators, we thought that it would be a really great idea to talk about and get some advice from Doug about how all of us should be sharing our voices as teachers. Doug and I were also talking about how in our work as consultants and as teacher coaches, we often encounter teachers who are doing great things out there, but yet teachers tend to be reticent in sharing their knowledge. I don't know if it's a preponderance towards being modest or undercutting the successes that we have when it comes to student achievement. But again, we thought that Doug would be a great person to talk to, helping us, those educators out there who want to have a voice beyond their school building. Doug, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I appreciate the invitation.
Doug, one question to get us going. Why should we as educators, whether we're teachers, school leaders, it almost doesn't matter where within the quote unquote hierarchy we are, why should we be sharing our voice? Why should we be writing, presenting? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have multiple whys on that. First of all, it feeds our souls. It feels great when other people think, that's a good idea. I'm going to try that in my classroom. I appreciate that part of it is that, oh, wow, we're a profession. We're a group of educators trying to do very similar things. And it feels good to share and reinforcing. And it feels like I'm making a difference beyond my own classroom. So that's part of it. I also think when teachers and leaders share their practice, we keep it pretty real. It's not labs or clinics. It's actual practice in a classroom. It's looking at the impact we have on young people and the relationships and their learning and their development and growth. And I think that's an important part of going to a conference, reading something is, do you have access to people who are currently practicing? And I want us to be, with thought leaders and scholars and things like that. But I do want access to people who are actually implementing on the day-to-day basis the ideas and research. Third, I think it's about our reputations and our professionalism. And when we say to our students, so I work in a high school right now, and when I say to our students, I have to go give a presentation in Costa Mesa, and they're like, what's it about? What do you, or I'm going to this conference in Boston. Well, what's that about? No, I have to go learn more. And there's a couple people that I'm going to go listen to because I really want to hear what they say next. So my students see me as a learner. The students at our school see Nancy and I as learners and as people who people learn from. One of the things we do is we invite visitors to our school all the time. As today, when we were recording on Friday, we had 18 visitors on campus this morning walking classrooms. And so the students see that as well as, oh, people come here to learn things, not just younger people.
And I love that you see presenting, writing, other ways of connecting with the external community, both as an opportunity to share your expertise, but to also learn from others. Because I think if we looked at it that holistic way, where, because let's face it, Doug, none of us have all the answers, because if we had all the answers, our students would globally be doing better than they
Right.
are. So there's always that opportunity, yes, to learn from folks, but also to be part of that conversation and really bring to that conversation information that you have that others might not actually have. Because you were mentioning we get real, right? That those of us in the classroom or those of us leading, it's an everyday thing. And as you know, things happen all the time in school. We can plan our day, but often things happen anyway, despite our best intentions. So again, I like that you see it as a reciprocal relationship and that it is and should be a part of our professionalism. Doug, how did you get involved? You've, I believe, published over 250 articles and books, both independently and collectively with others. You had to start somewhere, probably. You had to put that first foot forward. So, what were some of the things you did to get yourself out there?
Really, I started going to conferences. I started going to conferences and making little presentations, state conferences, local conferences, because I had ideas, things that I were working in our schools, in our classrooms, and I wanted to go share and I wanted to talk with it. But I didn't start with presenting. I started with attending. And I started going to these professional events, and I'm like, well, I could share that. I have an hour in me that I can talk to adults. And so then the next year, I made a proposal. It was to an ASCD conference. I had gone the year before. I wrote a proposal, and somebody liked it, and they accepted it, and they made it a ticketed session, my first ever. And people had to go on the program and pick in advance. And it was so cool because the people who came really wanted to be there. They'd chosen in advance. Here's 1 hour of my life where I got to talk to other grown-ups about what I do in the class and how I think about it, the impact, etc. And I really enjoyed it. And so I think for me, that's where it started. I'm also really lucky that I was working at a school, a high school in San Diego, not the school I work at now, but a different one. And a professor brought some people around to our school. One of them happened to be the co-editor of the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy. And that person said to me, I really think you guys are doing some amazing stuff in this high school with literacy work infused across the school. Would you write an article for our journal so we can have it reviewed and see? It never occurred to me. Yes, I will do that. And he left his contact information, and I ended up sitting down and writing it. I got a whole bunch of advice on how to make it better from whoever the reviewers were. I did it. I sent it back to him. He reviewed it again. I got more advice, and on the third time, they accepted it. And it was my first ever journal publication, and it felt great. 6 or whatever months later, in those days, they mailed you a copy of a paper journal before anybody else got it. Next month, this will be public information. And that feeling of contributing to the larger profession never goes away. Everything that Nancy and I write, when it comes out, we take a moment and say, look at this. Someone is reading something we wrote, some idea we had, some thought we had, some synthesis we made. I want lots of teachers, most teachers, every teacher to have that experience. I say this all the time. Every teacher in this world has a book in them because we've collected so much experience. We take the research evidence, take the best practices, and we put them into action. It's just that most people don't sit down and take the time to write and share their thinking. I think there's other ways besides books. There are podcasts like this. There are blog posts. There are chapters. I mean, there's all kinds of ways. You can have a presence on social media. I watch teachers on TikTok all the time, sharing great information. there's all kinds of ways of doing this, of getting your thinking, your experiences, your recommendations out there. There's all kinds of websites that have made a lot of money sharing what teachers do. I appreciate that there's a revenue share with the teachers because we deserve to get compensated for this. We're also funded by the public. So I also think we have a responsibility to share some of our thinking in ways that are not for money. We still go to a lot of conferences for which there's no financial incentive because we're part of a community and we come together, we learn, we talk, etc. And I think teachers should be compensated for spending the extra time doing their blog posts and their TikToks and their LinkedIn and their web blog books and whatever. But I think the bigger reward is really the moral rewards that come. Someone read it, they liked it, it helped that teacher that's 5,000 miles away from me.
Indeed. What worked for me, I tried for years, Doug, to write for a well-known online website and never got through. Just never got through, no matter how many times I reached out to the editor. Because of this podcast, I met somebody who was a guest who made a connection for me years later. And now I write for that website. That's one way that I've been able to crack open that door and to be able to write. But what are some, I know you talked about attending conferences. I know you talked about being open when others suggest, hey, have you thought about writing, which is how you got started. What are some other ways you recommend teachers reach out? Like, how do they get that foot in the door?
First, I would start with what your comfort is. My level of comfort was talking. And I wanted to test things out talking. Other people are much more into video and media. Get your ideas out that way. Other people are much more into summarizing and writing. Get your ideas out that way. What is your start of comfort level? If you're really amazing at writing lesson plans, write lesson plans and share them on some of the sites that allow that. But what is your first level of comfort in how you share and get started? And I should say this as well. I got lucky on my very first journal article. I didn't get lucky on the ones that came after that for a while. I got rejection, rejection, rejection. And I stopped for a while. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do other things. And so I think that in that case, the editor was looking for something very specific. He saw it in our school. It took me 3 times to get it to the place where the editor said, this is what I want to shape. It had to be peer reviewed and stuff. But the next one, I've had so many rejections. I was talking to some students, graduate students, about something Nancy and I are working on, and we have a rejection. Flat out, we are not publishing this. And I shared it and said, don't think that you get to a place where you don't experience rejection. All of us experience a dose of rejection putting our ideas and information out there. You put your stuff on X or you put your stuff on one of the social media platforms, there are going to be people who say it's a terrible idea. And like you just said, that you contacted, don't get so distraught over rejection. It's going to happen if you put yourself out there. But if you think about your first couple of years of teaching, we got a lot of rejection too, thickening our skin a little bit, whether it was rejection from some of our students, feedback or whatever from our administrators. It helped us grow. It helped us develop. We're better for it now. And I would argue that I'm better for it because of people saying that's not good enough yet. You can do better.
So, one thing I do now when I reach out to the same organizations where I've had an article published, I might give 5 pitches. And like you said, maybe 4 of them will be flat out rejected. And then the 5th one will be, all right, give us a formal proposal on that one. Let's see how that one goes. And in fact, it's funny you're mentioning this, Doug, because I was listening to the radio today and it was a radio show and they were talking about the benefits of rejection. And
Oh, interesting.
it was on NPR here in the New York area. And they were talking about one of the benefits of rejection, constant rejection, is accepting it, not taking it personally, and going on to the next thing, but also not trying for perfection. Because so many things get rejected, You put your ideas out there. You see what other people, to your point, when you said that they were looking for something with that journal, they were looking for something in particular that they saw at your school. So put an idea out there, even if it is half baked, because you don't know what aspect of it is of interest to others. And then once you get that interest from that, let's say, in this case, it was a journal or an online website. Once you get that interest, then you could put together that more formal proposal that taps into what the publisher wants. I don't
Mhm.
know if that makes sense.
It does. There are multiple ways of getting voice out there in the world. And doing these things get our voice out there. I was just thinking as you were talking, there are future author sessions at most conferences. I went to one at Literacy Conference. I went to a session at the Math and Science Conference. Been to a session on writing at ASCD conference. Now it's the ASCD. People want educators to get their voice out there. And the example you were just saying, that's another way of getting voice out there. We all have stories to tell. We have experiences that are relevant, and we have taken our careers and tried to take this big body of research and make it real for young people. I think people want that out there in the world. I think publishers want it. I think the public through its social media and blogs and things like that wants it. And I think any of those pathways we have is good.
Now you were talking about you started in a different way. You started by talking and speaking
Yeah.
and putting together a formal proposal. What advice would you have? And I know every organization is different, Doug, but what advice would you have for people, including myself, who want to put a proposal together? I mean, again, I know every organization's different and it depends on the topic, but are there any rules to
Yes.
proposal
Oh,
writing?
yes. Okay, great question. Conferences have a theme. The majority of conferences have a theme. If you don't fit their theme, it could be an amazing proposal. You're not getting accepted because whoever put the conference together has an idea of what is the major message we're trying to get out there. Second thing, and some groups have advice for new proposal for conferences. Offer that, take advantage of it. But as a reviewer for conferences, especially peer-reviewed conferences that have review processes, the most common mistake I see is people try to put too many ideas in a presentation. It's like cramming a lesson with everything in the kitchen sink. It's going to flop. And when you see too many ideas, it's a rejection. It's not refined enough to get a message to the audience. And really think, how much time are they offering? There are some conferences where the slot is 20 minutes. There are other conferences the slot is an hour and 15. 2 hours probably is the most I've seen in a conference. What can you accomplish with an audience in that time? I see these proposals that are broad, sweeping overviews, ideas that are, I'm sure, made sense to the creator of it, and probably they could talk it through, but in the way it was framed, here's a bit of this, and here's a bit of this, and here's a bit of this, and here's a bit of this.
I like that advice. Be specific
Mm-hmm.
and be targeted. And to your point, know your audience and how long you have with that audience. On that note, since you do now review proposals for conferences, can you think of a generic example of a proposal that was not successful, that if they just made some of those tweaks, it might have been?
Oh, this is common for me. We'll get a proposal. There's a really good idea, and there's something that it's good. And one of the flaws is there's no attribution of where the idea came from. It's like they invented mastery learning, Madeline Hunter, or they invented visible learning and Note Site John Hattie, or it's so blatant that this idea has a history. That doesn't mean you can't present on other people's ideas. You have to attribute them. And I know that's very basic because we teach kids that, but I see a lot of proposals come through that as if the ideas have not existed before. And that alienates your reviewers. And the other one, there's a really good idea. There was a very strong center. But then when there was all this, and I'm going to talk about checking for understanding, and I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about this. If you would have stuck with that one core central thing, it would have got accepted. Because it seemed distracted and a little bit unfocused. It's not ready for prime time, as they say.
Right. Switching to writing, because
Yeah.
obviously you do a lot of that. I think some of that advice you just gave for proposals, because in a way, obviously, that is writing. It's
Yep.
writing to then get the opportunity to talk. But switching to a blog article or a peer-reviewed journal article, what advice would you have there for people in terms of writing something that's going to resonate for the audience?
Yeah. Again, you're going to need to know your outlet. If I'm looking at a new journal or something I want to write for, I go back and look at the last couple issues and figure out tone and the style. So that's one. What is the tone and style of this particular outlet? Like blogs, I've watched people do, 2,000 word blog, and every other blog in there, they submit a 2,000 word blog, every other blog in there is 600 or less words. It may be a great 2,000 words, it's too long. People tend to like numbered lists. For example, 5 engagement strategies. That tends to do well because you've organized them. It's one topic, engagement, and you've shown them 5 different ways to accomplish that. You're not telling anyone how to teach, you're giving them advice and ideas that work. Know that outlet really well. Hone your message down, I think is super important. I think if you look at the last couple issues, the tone, and there are places I don't write for because I don't write in that tone. I don't know how to do that. This is so not me. This is so not how I write. And I won't be successful. I have to find something that will like what I do. And then there are other places I read, and this is how I think, this is how I write. The topics they're publishing on are things I care about. They are consistent with what I'm doing. Also, in terms of rejection, know that the article or this what your submission might be very good, but they might have just published on that topic. And so don't take it so personally. The editor probably can't tell you, we've published 3 things on problem-based learning lately. We're not publishing 2 more. Sorry. They're not going to say it that way.
Oh, I
So,
don't know, Doug. The editors I work with, some of them would.
or we're not so blatant on that because it's supposedly the quality of the submission and not other things. But anyway, don't take it always so personally. Shop it somewhere else. If they don't want it here, take the advice. This is what the reviewer said. Shop it over here. Shop it over here. Also, in writing, the organization of what you write is important. Like we teach young people, what is it you want to tell us? Then explain it to us and then remind us what you just told us. And I know that sounds trite, but that's what we come to expect. Even in formality, there's an abstract, then there's the introduction, and then there's the lit. Even in that, we do that. We're very comforted by that structure on our writing. The non-academic, less academic, like the rigor ones, high citation scores, some of those, they really want a friendlier voice and they want to be more invitational. And so you gotta write like that to be more invitational.
Doug, are there any organizations or websites that you think would be particularly good for educators who are new to publishing online that they should reach out to?
Um, there are so many outlets now. It has to match your topic. Like if you're writing about science, there are people there and that work in the world of science. I would also ask my colleagues, what are you reading? When you go to get new information, what do you search for? Because I want to be in that. Some of my shaping around this was going to the conference and going to the session on writing for blah, blah, blah. At the time, I didn't know editors. I didn't know people who edited journals and magazines and books. I never met these people before. And so I would send things in, I would get these rejections back. Go meet them, go talk to them. These are human beings, and they've decided to focus on getting other people to write. I used to think kind of grouchy and mean. They're way up here in their careers, but it's a job where you're trying to get good ideas from people out there in the world. And so talk to them. What are you looking for? What's the tone? What kinds of topics are interesting to you? Don't be afraid to ask those questions.
But that leads me to my next question. That's when you know you want to present at a conference or you want to write. I know, Doug, and probably this has happened in your career as well, that I've worked with some really smart people, some up and coming educators. I have a vision in my head of one in particular that I've been trying to get them to write.
Yeah.
And I even made an introduction to an editor because I think this person could do a great job. Some of the people that I have recommended have taken me up on it, and now they're writing for
Yeah.
some of the same publications I'm writing for. Others, it's not their time yet. They're just not ready yet.
Yeah.
But I guess my question for you is, what can those of us who've been in the field for a while, who have some of those networking connections, see talent in others where those others might not see that talent themselves? I think in previous podcast, it might have been either Class Caffeine or Getting Smart. You had mentioned that somebody told you you were a good writer before you knew that you were a good writer. What responsibility do leaders have to encourage others to write? And how do we get more of these people to say yes
Yeah.
and to do it?
Yep. When I encourage a new writer, I say you got to be at the point where your ego is not attached to your writing. Because if your ego is attached to your writing, you're going to get bruised. I write a lot, as you said earlier. My ego is not attached to my writing. I write some things that are just not good. They're not ready. But we go through a process. That's why we have those processes. So if your ego can take it and grow from it, then you're ready. And I think more veteran people need to be opening doors. The people who open the doors for me, like the person, Jim Flood, who said to me, "You don't even know you're a good writer." I was in graduate school. I had not received any kind of feedback on my writing. I got grades, but a veteran, a pillar in the world of literacy, and to say, "You don't even know you're a good writer. You're a really good writer." I mean, it was just, and I'm sure I was not as good writer as with more practice and feedback that I have today, but hearing that and people opening doors. I want to write with you. I have a book coming out. I'm going to do a chapter. Would you contribute the chapter? I'll help you shape it. All of those things have supported me, guided me in being able to share my voice. And I think that's the responsibility. And I want to highlight one of the things you said. Some of the people you supported are writing in the same outlets that you write in. And some people would have trouble with that because they think there's a limited space, a limited number of pages, if you will. And that's not true. There's all kinds of room for ideas out there in the world. And so the fact that you've mentored people who end up in the same kinds of outlets as you is a sign that you have given back, not to the profession only, not to the students only, but to other grown-ups to share their voice. That's what we have responsibility. As soon as we experience success, we have responsibility to help other people experience that success. The people that opened the door for me and the people who said, "Go do this, don't do this one, choose this one. If you have limited time, this is a direction I would go." The people who willingly gave their advice are the reason I'm where I'm at today. And I hope that Nancy and I do that on a regular basis with people and say, it's not impossible. You can do this. It's hard work. If you just see my calendar, I have meetings of different kinds. Some of the meetings are writing and some of the meetings are editing. But on my calendar, I know what that means because I'm in a meeting, which means I'm unavailable. And I think a lot of people who don't write also don't calendar it. And sometimes I write, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to write. And then I get bored typing that. So I force myself to write something that'll probably get revised and edited many times. But learn those habits. There was a writing guru who said, time yourself, write 15 minutes and then go do something else. And then over time, expand that 15 minutes. That's what I do with our doc students. You have been a leader or whatever for a long time. You haven't sat at a computer to compose for a long time. So we're going to do these writing sprints and get you used to doing this. Being attached to people who have experience and having them open doors is really important.
Exactly. And one thing you said that really resonated with me is that people should not be afraid to collaborate on writing,
Right,
that in fact, no, it's not a finite amount because you might have one take
right.
on a topic. Somebody else might have a different take on a topic.
Yep,
I know that you had said in a previous podcast that you and Nancy sometimes agree and sometimes disagree, and you write together all the time. And
right.
there is that space.
That's right.
And to your point about listicles, 5 reasons for, 5 ways to check for understanding, those are your 5 ways. Somebody
Right.
else might have another 5 ways.
Exactly. And they're not wrong. If you were to read things I've written over the years, you will find it to be very, very rare that Nancy and I criticize anybody else's work. There have been times where we were asked directly to respond to something in a journal and offer critique. But generally, that's not who I am. I don't need to put other people down to put my things forward. I just put my things forward. And I wish, and there are people who are detractors who like to tear other professionals down. I just wish we could get past that in education. If you have an idea and it's counter to mine, I am totally okay with that. Put your work out there in the world. Put your ideas out there in the world. And then other people can respond to them. But spending time trying to tear down people, this is a bad idea, or this is no evidence. I mean, I wonder what motivated people, what happened to them that got them into that place where they felt that their career had to be tearing down other people's work. Quite honestly, our profession has grown and grown. I mean, the things we know today from the evidence base is way more than we knew 50 years ago. But the people 50 years ago did the best with what they had and the evidence that they had at the time. And so I think we have to be very careful about attacking and criticizing.
Right. And to your point, it was almost like you could look at those people 50 years ago as the building block.
Right.
Maybe you would not, or we would not even be talking about this subject if they weren't the one that initially
Right.
initiated the conversation. And I think if we look at these as conversations, they're
Right.
not conversations like you and I are having live in the moment, but
Right.
they're conversations over time, conversations over generations. And to your point, rather than tearing down the work that came before, and this relates to what you were saying about proposal writing, acknowledge the work that came before
Right.
and then take it to the next level.
Exactly right.
What about this is one thing that keeps me in the profession, writing, speaking, the podcast. It's given me joy in learning what I don't know and finding people that also think like I do at other times, thinking about it, or maybe a new way of thinking about it. But it's really kept me current and in the conversation.
Yes.
That's what keeps me in the field. Now, I'm not in a classroom anymore. I'm a consultant, but what would be your advice for recruiting teachers and retaining teachers as well as school leaders? Because I know that you're doing a lot of work now at San Diego
Yeah.
with leaders. How do we get more people and keep more people?
Awesome question. And the work you're doing to support educators now, I think is super important. How do you help people feel good about it? So the things I read about retention, part of it are the moral rewards. Having relationships with young people, having healthy growth producing student teacher or educator relationships is amazing for us. We love it. We thrive on it. But one of the things I think about is that some educators don't think they're having the impact that they want to have. And if you don't have an impact and you don't think your efforts are making a difference, you're probably going to put forth less effort, get less impact, put forth less effort, and you end up with this cycle. So one of the things I think we have to help our colleagues understand is you are having an impact. Even if it's not the impact that you want to have. When you did this, I saw this great thing happen. If we could help people reconnect their effort and their impact that they have. In this lesson, I saw this great thing happen. This week I saw any of us who visit other teachers' classrooms need to be thinking about how we frame the impact that people have. Maybe it was remote learning and things like that that caused us to disconnect. Maybe it was all the stressors in society, the pressure we get from being beat up as teachers all the time. But somehow there's more of a disconnect between our effort and our impact now. And I think we have to help teachers reconnect that. I think that helps save the profession. I also think understanding the multi-generational workforce is super important. We have people from previous generations running the systems and they impose their values, their beliefs, their ideas from that generation on a different generation. And there's nothing wrong with Gen Y, Gen Z, Alphas. There's nothing wrong with them. They were socialized and raised in a different way. Gen Z wants to have this mission. They want to accomplish things. They want to be part of something bigger. And if they get bogged down too much and don't feel like they're living their mission, they don't like their work anymore and they'll go find something else to do. And if you don't understand that, because your generation is a grind and being efficient, there's nothing wrong with that. But you're going to have this conflict and you end up running people out. A few things that go into what's going on here. On a bigger scale, I wish we could figure out how society valued teachers again. There's a whole PR campaign that we need, sharing stories of the impact. What I read is parents generally support the teacher that they have in their class and the school, but generally think schools are bad. And so there's this disconnect of my child's teacher and my child's school are good, but overall, it's an awful place. And that's part of that narrative in the media about schooling, if you will. And so I think we have some work to do. By the way, as educators, we should be very careful when we talk about the bad things that happen. And we're a human service. There's going to be some bad things. We don't talk about it in the grocery store. We don't gossip about it with our friends because that narrative gets out there that schools are out of control, and that's bad for all of us.
It's funny, when you were speaking, Doug, I thought immediately to what we were just talking about, the why write, the why communicate, the why serve as a thought partner out there. I'll give you an example. I teach student teachers at Brooklyn College.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things I find over and over again, it doesn't matter which semester it is. If I suggest something to a student teacher, say, "Oh, you should try this." "Oh, I don't know. I don't want to upset the apple cart." And "Oh, I don't." And yes, it is the collaborating teacher's classroom, but it got me thinking that you should say something. You should introduce new strategies you're learning with me and with us at Brooklyn College to your collaborating teacher, because maybe they went through schooling a while ago and don't know some of the other ways of doing something. Again, not necessarily better or worse, just different. When you were saying that Gen Z is going to leave if they don't feel that value driven purpose, all the more reason we should also have young people writing about their experiences teaching and what does Gen Z want in the teaching profession. Those of us that are older can
Right.
still learn from that. So that's
That,
number
right.
one. That really resonated with me, what you were saying there. The other thing that resonated with me was when you were talking about the disconnect
Mm.
between I like my teacher, I hate the school. That even makes me think maybe that's all the more reason for not just teachers, but leaders to be communicating
Yes.
more and sharing their
Yeah,
thoughts.
exactly. And leaders need to be sharing big success. What are the bigger successes? This school is amazing. Look at the things that we're doing. The group TNTP put out this report that they studied, and it's called Opportunity Makers. And they focused on schools that made a very significant difference in students' lives, in their learning lives. And that narrative has to be out there. We do great things. The schools that did it, and we got to get more of that out there. I think we have to be careful because the narrative becomes schools are bad, there's nothing we can do, the kids are out of control, and it erodes the trust in our profession.
So, Doug, we've talked about a lot of ways that educators should, or why educators should share their voices, how they can share their voices, how they could go about getting their voices heard, networking. What have we not talked about that you think it's important for our listeners to know?
I would also say that we have responsibility to be consumers of all of this stuff that people put out there. We run the risk being very busy, being very committed. We run the risk of not gaining new information. When people put things out there, where do you go to find new information? Where do you go to consume, not just produce? So yeah, I write a lot, but I also read a lot. I also watch a lot of videos. I like learning from other teachers. I go to conferences because I like being around educators who help me think about the work we do. Go to conferences, read things. When you find your niche that you like to consume information, contribute to it. But I do think it starts with starting to understand the current state, things that are people talking about, what's going on in our world.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because coming up, I'm going to have an episode with Jen David Lang, who runs The Main Idea,
Yeah.
and how she creates and writes these great synopses on education books. And
Mhm.
I'm always recommending in the PLC work that I'm doing in different schools, if you don't have time to read the whole book, read the cliff notes, read the
Mhm.
main idea notes, and then what resonates from what that person wrote that you can then apply in your school. If you're interested in ways to engage students, consume some of the information that's out there. And whether it's Jen David Lang's main idea, whether it's Kim Marshall's The Marshall Memo, how can we as consumers use what other people have written, even a TED Talk, if you will,
Yep.
in our PLC work to make our schools better? Because you bring up a very good point. Yes, we've spent a lot of time talking about the sharing of our voices, but that's the other critical piece. We have to let voices in.
That's right. I agree with you.
So, Doug, where can people find out more about you and the work you do?
Our website is fisherandfry.com, Frey. I have really taken on LinkedIn. I am really enjoying my LinkedIn community. I find it to be very professional, very generous. So if you're on LinkedIn, Doug Fisher is my LinkedIn. I post almost every day on LinkedIn. I started this thing around looking back at things I wrote a long time ago, and I'm doing a rewind. So here's something I wrote in 2010. Here's what I agree with. Here's what I would probably do differently now. The one I did the other day was, I still really like these ideas. I still believe in these ideas. So rewind has been really fun for me. That's probably the best way.
Doug, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a very interesting conversation, and I hope educators out there take us up on the challenge of
Yes.
sharing their voice.
Yes, I do too.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.